Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage. And someone will say his career can never be saved. Despite all his rage, he's still just Nicolas Cage.
Welcome to Just Nicolas Cage, where I very slowly work my way through Nicolas Cage's filmography. And today I'm talking about the 2005 satirical crime drama Lord of War. In Lord of War, Nicolas Cage plays an international arms dealer, and the movie follows his rise to success during the 80s and 90s in the world of the illegal gun trade. We see him struggle with several relationships, including his wildcard drug addict brother with more of a moral conscience than him, a business partnership with an extremely dangerous African warlord, and a cat and mouse game between him and an Interpol agent that's dead set on putting him in jail. The character that Nicolas Cage plays in this movie, Yuri Orlov, is a composite of several real-life gun traffickers. But the real-life person that he's most commonly attributed to being based on is the Russian arms dealer Victor Bout. I did a little bit of research on Victor Bout, and he does share some similarities with Nicolas Cage's character in Lord of War. For one, both have the nickname Merchant of Death.
I was an equal opportunity merchant of death.
Victor Bout is indeed the chief sanctions buster at the present time, a real merchant of death.
Although it does seem like over the years a lot of people have been called Merchant of Death, including another gun trafficker. And also Alfred Nobel, the man who established the Peace Prize, was named Merchant of Death after invented dynamite. And here's another arms dealer that was given that nickname.
And what do you say to your other nickname, the Merchant of Death?
That's not bad.
But that's not the only similarity between Victor Bout and Yuri Orlov. They're both Eastern European prolific gun runners that dealt guns to Afghanistan, Colombia, and Africa. Neither had a political agenda to the gun business. Both have a flair for languages and had multiple passports. And just like in the movie Lord of War, Victor Bout capitalized on the end of the Cold War because the change from communism to capitalism and the ability to now seize state assets created a big opportunity for him. Although I'm not sure if Victor Bout celebrated the news by kissing Gorbachev's birthmark like Nick Cage does in the movie. Victor Bout actually even addressed Nicolas Cage's alleged portrayal of him.
Is it true that there was a Hollywood based on your
I
story?
feel very sorry for Nicolas Cage, who went to play this sort of love. It's very silly, and I feel pity for... It's bad movie.
But what's possibly the most fascinating part of Victor Bout's life story actually happened in 2022, when he was released after serving 10 years in an American jail as part of a prisoner exchange for the release of an American women's basketball player who was sentenced to 9 years in Russian prison for carrying a vape that had less than a gram of hash oil. I mean, you can't make that up. And knowing that that's how the real guy got out of jail actually makes the movie's ending a little bit underwhelming in comparison. Because the real event was more absurd than what happened in the over-the-top exaggerated Hollywood movie. Based on my research, it seems like Victor Bout is somewhat of a polarizing figure. To some, he's an evil, all-powerful supervillain that supplied guns to terrorists and the Libyan dictator Gaddafi.
Victor Bout, in my eyes, is one of the most dangerous men on the face of the earth.
So he weaponizes civil war in Africa.
He transformed these young adolescent warriors into insidious, mindless, maniacally driven killing machines that operated with assembly line efficiencies.
But I've seen some people argue that he was a victim of conspiracy and a scapegoat that was arrested under false pretenses.
There was a political desire to make somebody pay for the illegal arms trade. He's a convenient scapegoat. He's not the only Russian businessman whose aircraft have flown weapons. I mean, I'm certainly aware of also American businessmen who do the same thing. The tragedy is that there's been this huge waste of time and resources, which has put somebody away in prison for God knows how long, and has done absolutely nothing to try and curb the excesses of the illegal arms trade.
But I'll leave it at that for now. I don't want to get too far into the real-world politics and the morality of gun running, so I'm going to try and keep that specific to the movie. So let's dive into Lord of War. I think the movie that Lord of War most reminded me of, more so than other films involving gun trafficking, is Thank You for Smoking. They're both character-focused dark satires released in 2005 about a man that facilitates and advocates the sale of a product that's controversial to say the least. And that movie presented its political satire and insight into greed in a humorous and palatable way. And I think that Lord of War takes a similar approach. For a story about a man who profits on death for a living, Lord of War is very stylized and flashy. It opens and closes with Nick Cage talking directly to the camera while surrounded by hundreds of bullets. It almost looks like a public service announcement video. And if it was up to me, every movie would start and end with Nicolas Cage talking to the audience. I will say that this movie is not subtle. There's a part where the bullet cases are popping out of the gun and making a cash register noise. Do you see what they're doing there? Fun fact, the filmmakers of Lord of War worked with actual gun runners while making the movie, and they used thousands of real rifles because they're cheaper than prop guns, which is actually quite thematically on brand for this movie. But somehow they have a scene that's even less subtle than the guns making a literal ka-ching noise, and that's when they play the Eric Clapton song Cocaine during a scene where the characters do cocaine. It's a little bit on the nose, don't you think? Get it? On the nose because of cocaine. This movie is also very heavy on the voiceover narration. I think they were going for a Goodfellas thing, and the Scorsese influence is definitely apparent throughout the film.
Growing up in Little Odessa, murder was an everyday part of life.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
I'm not against the use of narration in a film, but honestly I think there's way too much voiceover in Lord of War. I didn't do the maths, but I wouldn't be surprised if Nicolas Cage actually has more dialogue via voiceover than regular dialogue in the movie. And also after reviewing Adaptation a few months ago, it's hard to forget the immortal words of Brian Cox.
And God help you if you use voiceover in your work, my friends. God help you. It's flaccid, sloppy writing.
But the stylized quality of the movie is most apparent in the opening title sequence, which I gotta say is a contender for the best opening credit sequence to a movie ever. It's excellent. It takes us through the life of a bullet from the bullet's point of view. It goes from the manufacturing facility to being shipped off and then loaded up in a gun and then eventually flying into the head of a young soldier. The CGI is a little bit dated, but the bullet sequence certainly makes an impact, if you pardon the expression. You do get caught up in the fun of the high concept and the cool Buffalo Springfield song in the background, and it's a genuinely fun and creative sequence. And then in the end it hits you with a harsh reminder that, oh yeah, bullets can be used to kill children. And the contrast of something cool alongside its harsh implications is a technique they often go for in the movie. This applies to the general way that Nicolas Cage's character Yuri Orlov is presented in the film. His character is cool in the same way that when you're younger you think that Tony Montana is the epitome of cool. And Yuri Orlov does do some badass stuff in this movie. He gets shot during a gun deal and then celebrates his acquisition of multiple bags of drugs by doing a line of coke, while still sporting a gunshot wound. But his coolness is also partly down to Nicolas Cage's great performance. His charisma is dialed up to the max, and he has a big cheesy grin on his face for a lot of the movie. And also look at the way he delivers this badass line between a drag of the cigarette.
There are over 550 million firearms in worldwide circulation. That's one firearm for every 12 people on the planet. The only question is, how do we arm the other 11?
What he's saying is immoral, obviously, but also pretty cool. Outside of all the exposition he delivers via voiceover, a lot of his dialogue is made up of snappy lines and quips.
60% improved noise suppression. You could pump a mag into me right now and never wake the guy in the next room. Of course, that would eliminate your opportunity for repeat business.
Answer the question. Oh, the new MP5. Would you like a silencer for that?
Can you bring me the gun of Rambo?
Part 1, 2, or 3.
A lot of those lines are funny, but I do think that they make the character feel more like a product of Hollywood than a real person. Like I said, he's not directly based on anybody real, but I do think those perfect one-liners take away from the general realism of the film a little bit. But I get it, those one-liners are there to make things a little easier to stomach for the audience. If he was less charming, then his immoral actions would seem even more reprehensible. Even though you know that what he's doing is wrong, you can't help but want to watch him continue to do it because he's so good at it. Kind of like Walter White in Breaking Bad. But despite how charming and entertaining Nicolas Cage is in the movie never really wants you to think that Yuri Orlov is a good person. He makes business deals with a ruthless dictator that has an army of child soldiers, and also that guy's son is a literal cannibal, and Nick Cage sells guns to them in exchange for blood diamonds. There's not much ambiguity there, and even outside of the gun running, he still doesn't really come across as a good person. He doesn't spend much time with his son. He manipulated his wife into meeting him by booking her a fake photo shoot and then buying out a hotel. And he also eventually cheats on her with a woman from the most AIDS-infested region of the globe. That being said, his character isn't presented as being a completely evil villain. The movie does balance it a little bit. It sprinkles in a few things that stop him from being an entirely irredeemable piece of shit. He's just mostly a piece of shit. Like I said earlier, his character doesn't have a political motivation to his gun running. At one point he says that he sold to every army but the Salvation Army, and the only reason that he never sold to Bin Laden is because Bin Laden was always bouncing checks. And this puts him at odds with his rival, played by Ian Holm, who you might know as Bilbo Baggins. His character in the movie is a gun runner that picks sides when he sells guns, so he can influence wars in the way that he wants.
You think I just sell guns, don't you? I don't. I take sides.
But in the Iran-Iraq war, you sold guns to both sides.
Did you ever consider that I wanted both sides to lose?
While Nicolas Cage's character is motivated by greed, which still shows lack of morals because he doesn't care about aiding terrible people, it's still just strictly business to him, and that suggests a neutrality to his evil. But Ian Holmes' character is doing it for the power and the influence as well as the money. And by the way, I know I said I didn't want to get involved with the real world politics of it all, but is that so different to what the government does? Like I said, both of those mindsets are really bad, obviously, but I think the fact that Nicolas Cage's character is in the game just for the financial gain makes him the lesser of the two evils. He does explain that he would rather people fire his guns and miss every shot just as long as they buy his guns and ammo. He also rationalizes that war will always exist and guns are always going to be sold, so he might as well make a profit out of it. And in probably the best monologue of the whole film, he calls himself a necessary evil. He also doesn't seem to get any enjoyment from the dirty consequences of his job. At one point he's selling guns to a dictator who shoots one of his own men in front of Nicolas Cage. And Nick Cage does seem visibly upset by that, but he has to quickly play it off. There's also a pivotal moment that I thought was really interesting, but it's quite a big spoiler, so okay, heads up. There's a scene where the dictator puts a gun in Nicolas Cage's hand, and the dictator is also holding the gun and he aims it at one of their mutual rivals. The dictator explains that you could stop this at any time you want, but I don't think you want to. And Nick Cage doesn't stop him and the dictator pulls the trigger. I thought this was a great metaphor for what he's been doing the whole time. Yuri Orlov has had his hand in thousands of deaths by handling the guns that other people pull the trigger to. It's only now that it's happening in front of him that he becomes emotionally affected by it. And straight after that part, he does seem genuinely traumatized. And he deals with that by drinking and doing cocaine mixed with gunpowder. He even has hallucinations of the man that he allowed to be killed, which does suggest regret and trauma from the experience. It's a compelling part of the film, but then soon after he seems to quickly get over the PTSD, which is a shame because it would have been interesting to explore further. He does go through somewhat of an arc where he's confronted by the consequences of his occupation, and he does become a little less smarmy. But still, by the end he does kind of seem in a similar place to where he started, which I think is the movie's way of saying war never changes. But I still kind of wish the movie spent more time exploring his guilt and regret. The supporting cast are one of the weaker aspects of the film, I think. Not that the performances are bad, I just kind of think the characters are underdeveloped and underused. Jared Leto plays Nicolas Cage's brother in the film. I would point out how they look nothing alike, but I've also seen a movie where Nick Cage's brothers were played by John Lovitz and Dana Carvey, so it's definitely an improvement on that. I'm not the biggest fan of Jared Leto. I used to think he was alright until all the Joker publicity stunt stuff, and now it's hard not to think about that whenever I see him in a movie. But Jared Leto is alright in Lord of War. The character's a bit of a cliche, and his arc in the third act felt a bit rushed, but he does have some unhinged moments that actually sell him as Nicolas Cage's brother. And I did like the part where he made an outline of Ukraine out of cocaine. Ethan Hawke plays the Interpol agent in the movie. When talking about Ethan Hawke, I feel like I have to bring up this amazing quote he once said about Nicolas Cage on an Ask Me Anything thread on Reddit. He opens with a shout out to the One True God subreddit, which is already amazing, and then goes on to say that Nicolas Cage is the only actor since Marlon Brando that's actually done anything new with the art of acting. He's successfully taken us away from an obsession with naturalism into a kind of presentation style of acting that I imagine was popular with the old troubadours. And he goes on to say that Nicolas Cage is one of the great actors of our time. I think it goes without saying, but I agree. Unfortunately, I thought Ethan Hawke's character was very generic. He's a determined, unbribable agent, and that's about it. I wish somebody as great as Ethan Hawke had more to work with here. I did enjoy some of the cat and mouse moments between him and Nick Cage. I like the part where Cage's crew had to quickly change the name of the ship, and there's another great part where Cage's plane is about to get searched, so he has to quickly give away free guns to all the locals. These scenes with Cage's character staying one step ahead of the agent are very inventive. It's just that I wish in the cat and mouse game, the cat was more compelling of a character. Likewise with Cage's character's wife played by Bridget Moynihan. She's kind of a bland character that never really elevates out of the trope. I already mentioned Ian Holm as the rival gun runner, and he's certainly an interesting character in the way he represents such a different mindset to the protagonist. But he's also very underused. I would have liked to have seen a lot more of the character. The Liberian dictator character is quite good. He's played by Eamon Walker, who played Saeed in the show Oz. I think he does the best job out of the supporting cast. Once again, it's not a particularly nuanced character, but he serves the purpose of the narrative well, and the actor does a great job of balancing being funny and scary.
You know, there is no discipline with the youth today. I try to set an example, but it is difficult, eh? Personally, I blame MTV.
So overall, This movie is solid. There's a few cringy lines of dialogue here and there, and I wanted a lot more out of the supporting cast. I also think that it's not quite the hard-hitting, nuanced exploration into morality that it could have been considering the subject material. That being said, I'm aware that I've been very negative during this review, but I was certainly entertained by the film. It never stops being interesting. It's very well shot, and Nick Cage is doing coke and talking about guns and saying cool things. What's not to love about that? Also, I've spent like half of this review talking about the morality that this movie presents, and it also inspired me to watch a BBC documentary about Victor Bout. And most importantly, it got me to seriously think about gun trafficking, which I'd never done before. So I guess the movie was successful in that regard. I think when this movie works, it really works. I just wish the script was a little bit more focused and a little bit tighter. I do recommend it though, especially to Nick Cage fans. So apparently a sequel is in the works called Lords of War, starring Nick Cage and Bill Skarsgård as playing his son. I'm a little bit skeptical because it's been so long since the first one, but it does have potential. Maybe at one point he gets arrested, then gets swapped for a female basketball player. And obviously so much has happened in Ukraine since the first movie, so there's a lot they can do with that. Nicolas Cage's character is from Ukraine in the movie, by the way. I just realized I forgot to mention that. So the next movie Nicolas Cage did is The Weatherman, so until next time guys, thanks for watching.